When Sears Roebuck was closing down scores of their brick and mortar outlets a few years ago, it was often Amazon that was pointed to as the culprit. But just as often, Sears would be compared with Amazon or vice versa, and rightly so, as the two retailers have so much in common, chiefly that they are each reflections of the time periods in which they were introduced. This is the EPS Podcast, and I'm your host, Eric Paul. Christopher Mims is a tech columnist for the Wall Street Journal and the author of Arriving Today, From Factory to Front Door, Why Everything Has Changed About How and What We Buy. The book inspired a documentary, Chain Reaction, which focuses on how the world's supply chain has been strained in recent years. I was delighted to have him join the Everything is a Primary Source podcast to talk about Amazon as a document of the early information age that was the 1990s. I'd like to welcome you back to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. I'm Eric Paul, and today I'm being joined by Christopher Mims. Christopher is a technology columnist for the Wall Street Journal. He's also written a book called Arriving Today, and a documentary that is based on that same title called Chain Reaction. And that's where we cross paths, isn't it? Was through Chain Reaction. Welcome to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So I think you are one of two people that I can say that I was emailing while I was watching your production. So the first one was about 8 years ago. Long story short, I emailed Winston Groom, the author who wrote Forrest Gump, because over a jersey that I had found, an Alabama Crimson Tide jersey, and I was watching Forrest Gump while I was corresponding with him. So similar story. When just a few weeks ago, I was teaching economics class, and like I always, like I always do, I previewed Chain Reaction before I showed it, and as I was watching it and showing it to the students, I said, the gentleman who's presenting on this, who's part of the documentary, I think he'd be fantastic for the podcast. So I reached out, and thank you for making this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
So I am obsessed with calling everything a primary source, but I actually do have a litany of questions that I ask for secondary sources. I have a secondary source evaluation form. And while I was watching Chain Reaction, I was very happy to say that it met all of the requirements as a teacher I want for a secondary source. It was made by somebody who knows the topic that's connected to it. It had all sorts of great primary sources in it. I love the footage that you had of the trucks on the road from the '60s. You had great interviews with people. It wasn't just a once over. And the most important thing is that it came across very even keeled. It was unbiased. It was just very straightforward. Here's the deal. And so uh, every step of the way in that documentary, where we follow uh, what was it, a USB port thing from its manufacture to its delivery, we get to see the chain of uh, production and the chain of delivery, and the supply chain. And each one of those supply chain parts is a primary source. It's a product of a different time period. Everything from the ships to the ports to the, not a lot of rail in that story, but the trucks, the interstate highways, and then when we get to about halfway through the country, we get to the distribution center, and that's where Amazon comes in. And that's what we're going to talk about today: is Amazon as a primary source. So did you find when you were writing the book and then watching and then making the documentary, that each one of these things that came about for its own time period, they were the best that you could have in that era for, in this case, transportation?
Sorry, do you mean each component? Um, being the best that was available for that part of the journey, or
Or sort of like when they were introduced in the that everything is a product of necessity in the case of moving commercial items that and so improvements in this country anyway have gone everywhere from overland to then canals to then railroads to then the roadways and the highways, and it seemed like each part of that was kind of like for its time when it was introduced, sort of the height of that moving of things technology.
yeah, definitely. I mean, the in order to move stuff, I mean, we get to take for granted that things are available to us cheaply and instantaneously, near instantaneously, if you're using e-commerce, because every link along that chain of items being delivered to us has just been optimized as much as is possible. So just like you said, there was a time when we don't think of it now, but like the Erie Canal was, transformative for the
Mhm.
United States during the 1800s and even earlier when there were other canals, because it just made it easy and cheap to move stuff inland, and then the railroads came, and that absolutely was completely transformative for the United States of America. And in the modern day, like obviously highways, rail make a big difference, but the giant ships that ply our oceans are
Mhm.
what are absolutely essential to the way the global economy works. And pretty much everything. Any the saying goes, any room you're in, look around. Maybe 8 out of 10 things in that room came to you by ship. Ultimately, we just don't think
Yeah.
about it.
I remember coming across, I forget, I think it was probably on Amazon actually. I was looking through different books that they had, and there was one just called Global Trade Routes. And all it was map after map of all these lines crisscrossing the globe. And I really wanted it because I love studying that kind of stuff. And remember a couple of years ago, I was buying a car seat for my son, and they didn't have any in stock at Walmart. So I ordered it online, and I remember tracking it from being I've basically followed it across the ocean, just like the documentary shows. No, and I didn't really understand until, seeing it and watching it in documentary form just how massive those container ships are and just how much stuff they have in them and how perilous the journey is. And I watched it, I was like, all right, is it going to come across the ocean? Okay, there it is. And then it got to California, and then I watched it get across the country, and eh, you know, I'm sure it was on a rail at some point, right? Before it got to the trucks. Um, so when dissecting a primary source, anything treating it like a primary source, I like to always start with the material that's made out of it. So when it comes to Amazon.com, all of that infrastructure that was part of the plan from the beginning, right? Was to find a way to get initially books to the public, um, through order online, but then we'll get it to your door using all of these different modes of transportation.
Yeah, I mean, it was that Amazon's e-commerce infrastructure was built for books initially, and later they expanded to CDs,
Yeah.
and then they expanded to other non-perishable consumer goods. But yeah, the along the way they did have to evolve that infrastructure, and it did change quite a lot in some ways. But fundamentally, that's what it was intended for, was books, and it's still delivering tons of books alongside everything
Hmm.
else.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say e-commerce because I remember in the late '90s when you know that became a term, e-shopping. I was working a retail store. That was my job when I was on break from college, and it was. I remember the meetings at the beginning of I was usually there for the holiday season, so they would always have our meeting at the beginning of the day, and they would tell us, well, there's a couple, there's some sales right now, but we're not worried about that. We're going to do fine. Brick and mortar, we're way ahead of it because at that time Amazon wasn't really part of the scope as much as so many of the actual brick and mortar places, especially with things like clothing. I worked at a clothing store, so we weren't. people are like, I'd rather try that on instead of just ordering it online and then having to wait forever to get it to show up, and then if it doesn't fit, all that business. So um given the era, the late 1990s, when Amazon emerges, it's a perfect reflection of what people are willing to purchase online, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, part of the genius of Amazon's early years was Jeff Bezos recognizing that books in particular were a thing where having the biggest catalog was really valuable, right? Because books have
Yeah.
just like, as they say, like a very long tail distribution where it's like, there are books that only sell like 5 copies a year, but somebody wants one of those 5 copies. And so if you have an infinitely large library, then people will come and order these items from you online rather than having to go and get it in person. And also at the time, we forget this, but like even from Amazon at the time, delivery took a week or something.
Yeah.
And so that was okay if it was a book, right? So that was part of the sort of initial genius, was like, what is a non-perishable good with this kind of infinitely large library, um, that would actually benefit from being available on the internet, that people will jump through the hoops. Because
Hmm.
also, it's easy to forget this, but like at the time it was like hard to pay for stuff online. Like you had
Yeah.
to punch in all of this information, and everyone was worried about, well, is this secure?
Right.
PayPal was new, but even PayPal was really clunky back then. So the whole system was not seamless the way it is now. So, Jeff Bezos had to find something that people who had computers and internet connections wanted to buy, and that they would be willing to jump through all those hoops to get online.
Yeah, and it was, and you said it so well. Clunky would be the right word. I was just talking to a coworker yesterday about the many pathways of the internet, and he was basically saying how he likes what I do. He was saying I use the internet how it was intended to be used, back when it was first introduced, and some of the other stuff not so much. I took the compliment well because I feel like every couple years, maybe even less than that, now that in the 21st century, it seems like there's a crossroads, or at least a fork in the road, which direction the internet can go. And when Amazon was first being introduced, it was like not everybody was on board with, like you said, going shopping on the internet. Is that the direction we're going to go? It's just like TV, when in the 40s and the 50s, when it was being first introduced and rolled out, people were like, is this going to be a educational device, or is it going to be purely entertainment, or maybe a little bit of both? And I think the internet has been through many phases, but the phase it was in late 1990, more and more people were getting it. Still a lot of dial up, so shopping might not have been the best option, to scroll through a lot of things. But there was more comfort with the internet by the late 1990s than there was even just 2 years earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean that changed, and it really led to the explosion and the scale of e-commerce and Amazon in particular.
Now, one of the questions that, and I don't always have to start and just like, "No, the next question is," but you know, just moving to Jeff Bezos for a second, because I mean, of course, his name is beyond household. I mean, it's like everybody knows Jeff Bezos is now. At the time, I remember it was probably 99, 2000, maybe around there, that Time Magazine had him Man of the Year. And like his head was like in a box, like smiling on the side in the cover of the magazine. And my girlfriend at the time was a lot more tech savvy than I was. My household didn't even have the internet yet. I'd always have to go to my friend's house to use AOL. And I'm like, who's Jeff Bezos? Like, I was like, so, and she's like, he's the guy from Amazon. I'm like, and what does that do? And she's like, "Ah," she's like, um, what was his status right at the, kind of what's his background? What world is he coming from? Is it commerce or is it tech?
Yeah, I mean, Bezos didn't come from either world.
Really?
Um, yeah, I mean, he was working, I think, at an investment bank or a hedge fund on the East Coast, and was, the kind of person who was responsible for analyzing, this
Mhm.
newfangled phenomenon known as the internet. And he just decided, this is going to be the biggest thing ever.
Mhm.
I want to get in on the ground floor. Um, you know, I think his own father cut him the first check that constituted an investment in Amazon. He packed up himself and Mackenzie Bezos, his wife, and they
Mhm.
moved to Seattle. And he said, I'm going to start an online bookstore. And of course, a lot of people thought he was crazy for a long time.
Yeah.
Um, but he is sort of singular as an entrepreneur, though. So yeah, he did not have a background in tech. He did not have a background in retail. His He did kind of idolize Sam Walton of Walmart,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos, his goal, his rocket company is not an accident. That has always been his goal. He gave a high school commencement speech, or sorry, I guess when he was valedictorian or whatever, he was like, this is my goal. I want to, take us to the moon and to the stars.
Mhm.
And I think that he, from a very early point in his life, was like, how can I build a Walmart scale company
Yeah.
so that I can fund my space ambitions? And then he just went and did it.
And I think that it's interesting because it still took a good part of the early 2000s to really arrive at the same level as Walmart. I just, I don't want to make it seem like all I do is show videos in class, but I my economics class, for a later unit on global commerce, I showed the Frontline episode from the early 2000s of "Is Walmart Good for America?" and um, Amazon doesn't even come up into the discussion. Like if they were making the same thing now, or even just 10 years later, Amazon, Walmart, they're in the same breath. They've reached that same point where I know, speaking from my own family's point of view, that, if something's not at Walmart, the local Walmart, sometimes we're in Walmart, we check Amazon. Or if we're on Amazon, we'll go, and see something, one price, or they don't quite have what we want. We'll say Walmart's the other option. So it seems like he understood the status that he wanted to achieve, and that would be the Sam Walton level, and he got there eventually, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he absolutely did, and he did it in some ways using the Walmart playbook. I mean, Walmart doesn't get credit for this, but Walmart is a technology company. I
Yeah.
mean, fundamentally, well, like Amazon, they're a logistics company, so they're a supply chain and logistics technology company. And Walmart, just they did a lot of they got there first for a lot of things that are essential to their business model of selling tons and tons of stuff very cheaply.
Mhm.
But also, like, he borrowed to some extent their kind of, as they say, doing business with a lead pipe sensibility, where he was very aggressive in his pursuit of, as he puts it, delighting the customer. But that meant that he was, going to give no quarter to his suppliers or competitors as well. So just a very, very competitive business person, which he also kind of lifted from Walmart in some ways.
And Walmart has almost two births in a way. Like they have the original Arkansas origin story, but then the rebirth came in the late 80s, early 90s, when they started going much more nationally. They used to be very much a, southern and midwestern store. You see it in the background of National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. They're in a Walmart at one point. I remember living in way upstate New York, North Country New York. It was kind of a big deal early mid 90s when Walmart came to town and they opened up their store, because we'd only heard of it and the low prices that they promised and all that. And if anything, that they almost, just like with Amazon, arrived right as China was coming online, as China entered the World Trade Organization and was, really present in the production side of things. That seems to be all kind of converging at the same moment. And Walmart is there, and Amazon is not far behind, like you said. And that can only tell me something, so much about the public. What does it say about American culture of the late 1990s, especially shopping culture, that everything was becoming so centralized and we liked it?
Um, well, I would push back on that a little bit. I think that Walmart's spread and the rise of the big box store was as much a product of various policies and federal subsidies. I mean, we massively subsidize our national highway system, which
Mhm.
is what allows Walmart to get goods delivered to it so cheaply, and that also incentivizes consolidation into larger stores. I mean, look, at the end of the day, obviously, Americans, like everybody, likes a deal,
Mhm.
and they appreciate being able to go to one place to kind of get everything that they need. In that way, Walmart really was a precursor to Amazon, where it's about convenience as much as anything else. Like, if Walmart allowed people to consolidate, what would be two or three or more shopping trips into one trip to Walmart, Amazon does the same, right? How many shopping trips does it eliminate? So I think that, both of them are about trying to give you low prices and convenience. And fundamentally, Americans value that, above a lot of other things. I mean, that's why Walmart has not had the same success in other parts of the world, because they're not, most parts of the world, frankly, are just more densely populated. If
Mhm.
they're as rich or near, or if they're a rich country, there's not the same car culture, etc. So Walmart, just in the end, like Amazon, has been uniquely compatible with the American way of life, and our infrastructure and our car culture.
And so it seems like that therefore the intended audience of Amazon, at least at the time, I mean, it's essentially the same as Walmart, like you say. But at the time, with internet usage being not quite what it was going to become, I remember looking at a statistic. I teach a pop culture class as well, and in that pop culture class, I used for their quizzes. I take these charts and diagrams, and there was one that showed, from the census report, and from basically the internet age onwards, the question would come up: Do you have internet connection, or do you have a computer? Or do you have internet connection? And um, that number like consistently rises throughout the 90s, and then it's right around 2001. It just goes straight up, and I always kind of assumed that had a lot to do with, well, everything becoming more affordable, internet, computer wise, but also people's, after 9/11, desire to be informed. They really wanted to know as much as possible all the time. That round the clock news culture really took on for everybody. Um, when Amazon was first arriving on the scene, when internet usage wasn't at the huge numbers that it was eventually going to become, do you think that this just shows Jeff Bezos's kind of, or Bezos's vision, that he was guessing right, and just kind of like, I'm expecting this is going to get better and better and go bigger and bigger, or did he want to be the reason that it got bigger and more used?
He definitely was riding the wave of what he perceived. I mean, he correctly assessed that, like, the internet was going to get huge. A lot of people thought that at the time, right? I think the difference was that, lots of people were trying to ride that wave by, you know, um, selling software or PCs. Like, he saw, correctly, that, retail was going to be huge. Again, lots of other people were trying to do the same thing, right? And getting
Mhm.
funded. But I think that he really had the self discipline to, want to, make the, as they say, the unit economics, make sure that you're making money on every sale, work from the start. Whereas tons of other companies just didn't have that discipline, and they got a ton of investment, and they flamed out. I mean, that's still true today, right? Like, we just went through a huge tech boom where tons of startups have flamed out,
Right.
or shown that they're just not that profitable after all.
I do recall that from, soon after when the bubble burst for dot coms back in, 96, 97 or so. And it seemed like everybody was trying to have a piece of the internet pie. And so many of them just didn't have what it took to make it. And it was almost like, um, the old guard of business was looking like, well, you kids had a nice try, way to go there. But, this is the way of doing it. But I'm glad, um, or it definitely shows that there was almost like a reorganization of that community, the tech community, to say, all right, well, maybe not having a different website for every single interest, or a different website for every single kind of product. Maybe if we kind of consolidate them and put them in one place, um, we can. And I guess I didn't realize how kind of early on Amazon really did live up to being more than just a bookseller and a few things. I have a screenshot, that I used for that same pop culture class for their test of, and I it wasn't until after I used the screenshot of, an old Amazon page that I realized I knew exactly where I was, on that day, because it's from August 27th, 1999. That was my first day of college. And I'm like, well, if I had turned on the internet at my dorm room, which didn't work out because they screwed up the Ethernet card and took me till January to get online. But had it worked, I would have, and I'd gone to Amazon, I would have seen that exact page. And they had everything from all the new Harry Potter books, of course, and they had the CDs, like you mentioned, but they also were selling by that point toys, games, video games are sold on there. I saw a few accessories being advertised, not quite full wardrobes, but a few accessories here and there. And it seemed like, a bit earlier than most people would imagine, that Amazon was really starting to have, live up to their A to Z. We have everything, we have it all, which, I think is, pretty remarkable, pretty good for, the last, for the very end of the 20th century, to get ready for the new era, to have a company ready to go like that. Um, you mentioned Seattle, so the next question that comes up when it comes to primary source dissection is, um, where was it made, and or what locations are associated with it. Seattle in the time period was the place to be for technology, right? Because of, Microsoft's connections there, and sort of that. Is that the sole reason why Seattle was the chosen location for Amazon? Was there, having to do with the big harbor there and the, connection to the Pacific Ocean?
Um, as far as I know, Jeff Bezos chose it in part for personal reasons. I mean, uh, uh, th- uh, during some of the early and middle years of Amazon's history, he was fond of saying that one of the biggest benefits of working for Amazon was that you got to live in Seattle. So I mean, he liked Seattle. He liked that part of the world.
Mhm.
Definitely being there was also motivated by the fact that there was an availability of the kind of infrastructure he would eventually need to distribute books, but also, yeah, talent from Microsoft and the rest.
Mhm.
But it wasn't Silicon Valley. So I think that was another way that he was smart, that he did not, force himself to compete with all the other tech companies in that part of the world for talent.
Initially, Amazon was a product of the existing infrastructure of the United States, including the ever expanding access to the internet that Americans were beginning to enjoy. As time went on, Amazon enjoyed utilizing the globe's robust supply chains, themselves products of decades, if not centuries, of development, to then become the baseline for shopping habits across the globe. Ultimately, treating Amazon as a primary source produces conclusions not just about big retail in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, but of, as my guest's book puts it, why everything has changed about how and what we buy. Thank you for listening to this deep dive episode of the EPS podcast. If you'd like to hear the second half or just wish to support the show, head over to either Patreon or Substack. Patreon.com/EPS podcast patron membership starts at the low price of $3 and caps at $10 a month. EPSpodcast.substack.com is where show notes and second halves of episodes land, as well as regular essays about pop culture and history. Follow the show on social media, especially Instagram. The link tree found there will lead you to all the other corners of the internet where the EPS podcast hangs out. Until next time, thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything, including Amazon.com, is a primary source.